Shalom, my name is Todd Bennett, and I'd like to welcome you to this latest episode of the Leaving Babylon series. In the last episode, we discussed the process of renewal, patterned and rehearsed through the appointed times, which is critical for our understanding of the covenant renewed by the Messiah. We also talked about the fact that Yisrael represents the set-apart assembly who is a party to this renewed covenant. Now, many people confuse Yisrael with Jews because of the fact that the house of Yisrael was exiled and seemingly lost forever. Now, this left the house of Judah as the only recognizable member of Yisrael, and that is where we derive the word Jew. Now, many people use the word Jew and Jewish roots as if to refer to Yisrael in total, but that's a very big mistake. You see, Jews are descendants of the house of Judah, and Judaism is the religion that is developed from the Pharisees. Now, it's not proper to use the blanket term Jew when referring to ancient Yisrael and the faith of Yisrael, which involved the house of Elohim and Elohim dwelling in the midst of the 12 tribes, and that house being operated by the Cohen and the tribe of Levi or Louis. Again, Judaism is a completely different religion developed by the Pharisees. And so we have people using and intermingling these terms which have very different meanings. Again, Judah was just one of the 12 sons of Yisrael. Judah was only one tribe of Yisrael. So let's take a moment and examine the covenant assembly. The covenant promise began in Babylon, and Abram was called out of Babylon, as we've discussed in many of the previous episodes. We talked about the name change that occurred with Abram during the covenant of circumcision. And the first time that we read the name Abram in the scriptures is in Genesis 11:26. Interestingly, we read et Abram. So we see the Aleph Tah connected with Abram from the very beginning. Now, the name Abram is spelled Aleph Bet Resh Mem. And remember when we talked about the month of Abib, and that Aleph Bet is actually the first word that can be spelled in the Hebrew language. It means father. Well, interestingly, that's what the name Abram begins with, that Aleph Bet, the word associated with father. And then Bet Resh in Abram means son. So we see father, son, right at the beginning of the name Abram. We then see the word son, which is bar, surrounded by Aleph Mem, which M. And M means a mother in the sense of bonding of a family. So it's the root of Imah, which is the common Hebrew word for mother. So right in the name Abram, we have the emphasis on the family. In fact, we have a whole family here. We have a father, son, and a mother. And this is important because it emphasizes that through this man, Elohim would make a covenant to build a family through the Messiah. Now, Abram was called a Hebrew because he passed through the waters. And he crossed over on his way from Babylon to the land of Canaan. He was not a Jew, he was a Hebrew. And when his name was later changed to Abraham, we see that a Hay was added to his name. Now, the covenant passed through the cutting of the covenant, that covenant of circumcision. His seed passed through that cutting of the covenant. So we see Isaac also passed through, and then Isaac's seed passed through the cutting of the covenant to Jacob. So this is a very Hebrew covenant that we see going from Abram to Abraham and then to Yitzhak and Yaakov. And as with Abram, Jacob also experienced a name change. And we read about that in Genesis 32:28. It says, and he said, "Your name shall no longer be called Jacob, but Yisrael, for you have struggled with Elohim and with men and have prevailed." And in Hebrew, we see a profound message that you can't see in the English. You see, it says, your name shall no longer be called Jacob, but Yisrael. And we see that M, which is Aleph Mem. And again, it has that relationship with a mother. And then it says, because you have struggled with Elohim and Anashim. So Yisrael is Aleph Mem, again, the root of Ima, mother. And remember that M was the same word that surrounds the son, Bar, in the name Abram. Now, there's a wordplay going on in the text of the Hebrew, because the or M attached to Yisrael is contrasted against the that's affixed to the Elohim and Anashim. Now, that's very interesting, because means a people, a congregated unit, specifically a tribe, a collection of troops or attendants, a flock, a nation, or a people. So we're seeing that Yisrael would be Yisrael, a people, a nation of tribes through the covenant made with Abram. Now this name change occurred prior to him crossing over at Peniel, which means the face of El. Here he wrestled with Elohim and he lived. And possibly it's the same place where Abram crossed over and became a Hebrew himself. Jacob was returning with his family and children after being outside the land and after receiving the blessing of Isaac instead of Esau. After he crossed over, he camped at Sukkot. And if you recall, Sukkot is the name of the appointed time of the seventh month. And we read about that in Genesis 33:17. It says, and Jacob journeyed to Sukkot, built himself a house, and made booths for his livestock. Therefore, the name of the place is called Sukkot. Now, interestingly, he built himself a house, a beit, and he built Sukkot for his miknah. And commonly, miknah is translated as flocks or livestock, but it's anything acquired. So his belongings went into sukkahs, which are temporary dwellings. Well, he lived in a house. Now, this is the transition that we long to make and what we actually celebrate at Sukkot, when those who belong to Elohim can move out of their temporary dwellings and move into the house of Elohim. Interestingly, we later read about Yisrael at Bethel, which means the house of Elohim. And it's here that we read about his name change a second time. And we read about this in Genesis 35:9-15. Then Elohim appeared to Jacob again when he came from Padam Aram and blessed him. And Elohim said to him, your name is Jacob. Your name shall not be called Jacob anymore, but Yisrael shall be your name. So he called his name Yisrael. Also Elohim said to him, I am El Shaddai. Be fruitful and multiply. A nation and a company of nations shall proceed from you, and kings shall come from your body. The land which I gave Abraham and Yitzhak I give to you, and to your descendants after you I give this land. Then Elohim went up from him to the place where he talked with him. So Jacob set up a pillar in the place where he talked with him, a pillar of stone, and he poured a drink offering on it, and he poured oil on it. And Jacob called the name of the place where Elohim spoke with him, Bethel. And of course, the word for this anointing of this pillar is very mysterious, because it's actually Mashiach. He Mashiach this stone. But that's for another teaching. We again read his name as Yisrael, and that's the focus of this episode. And in verse 10, so he called his name Yisrael. We read Et Shem Yisrael. The Messiah was now involved in this naming process, and thus we see the Mashiach there, the Aben stone that was anointed during this process. So Israel would become the nation that the Messiah would use as a conduit for the restoration of mankind through the covenant. But what does Yisrael actually mean? We see a basic definition from the text itself, Kisarit Elohim, and it's spelled Yud, Shin, Resh, Aleph, Lamed. Now it comes from the word struggled and Elohim. Struggled is Sarit, and it's Shin, Resh, Yud, Ta. So that's where we get the Yisar, and then so struggled with Yisar El, Elohim. So that's the basic definition, is that he struggled with Elohim. Interestingly, the Yud represents an arm, and Sar actually means royalty. Remember Sarai, and her name was changed to Sarah, Abraham's wife. Well, literally, her name means princess, and Sar means prince. So there's this royalty built in to the middle of this name. The M affixed to Yisrael places the emphasis on the mother binding the family together, and this mother is royalty. Now remember the promise given to Sarai at the covenant of circumcision, when her name was also changed. In Genesis 17:15 we read, "Then Elohim said to Abraham, As for Sarai, your wife, you shall not call her name Sarai, but Sarah shall be her name, and I will bless her and also give you a son by her. Then I will bless her, and she shall be a mother of nations. Kings of peoples shall be from her." Now this is an important point to remember, that the covenant of circumcision involved a cutting on the man's flesh, but that was to prepare him for emitting his seed into the womb. So both Abraham and Sarah were integral parties to the covenant of circumcision that would lead to the promise and creation of Yisrael, establishing a royal covenant family of Elohim. So we see Yisrael as the royal arm of Elohim, as the family representing the kingdom on this planet. Now remember, Adam and Hava were originally supposed to be essentially the king and queen of the kingdom, but they failed. Now through Abraham and Sarah, that process would be renewed through Yisrael. Now we talked about gematria in some previous episodes, and it's always interesting because the fact that every Hebrew character has a numerical value. I mean, obviously the creator is the master mathematician, the master physician, the master scientist, the master of it all. He created it all. So there's no coincidence that the language also is mathematical. And that's why it's always interesting to look at Hebrew, and I like to look at the numerical value of words and combination of words sometimes, because there are clearly messages built into them. The numerical value of Yisrael is 541. And what's very interesting is that's the same numerical value of the word for sheaves, al-mutakim, in Joseph's dream that bowed down to his sheaf. And we read about that in Genesis 37:7. It's also the equivalent of the word hamatzot, which means the unleavened. And we read about that in Exodus 12:17. It says, "So you shall observe et hamatzot, unleavened bread, for on this same day I have brought your armies out of the land of Egypt. Therefore you shall observe this day throughout your generations as an everlasting ordinance." So the et is actually attached to the matzot, representing Yisrael in this text. And there are many others that help paint the picture of the plan and the purpose of Yisrael. And the point is that in Hebrew, we see important principles that can only be seen and understand through the Hebrew language, and we miss it in the English. So it's always good to delve into the Hebrew on these matters. Now, Yisrael had 12 sons who eventually became 12 tribes. These 12 tribes eventually went down to Egypt as 70 beings, and we read about that in Exodus 1:1-5. It says, "Now these are the names of the children of Yisrael who came to Egypt. Each man and his household came with Jacob: Reuben, Simeon, Levi, and Judah, Issachar, Zebulun, and Benjamin, Dan, Naphtali, Gad, and Asher. All those who were descendants of Jacob were 70 persons, for Joseph was in Egypt already." And 70 is significant because it represents the nations, and that's how the peoples were divided after the flood of Noah. So we see 12 and 70 emphasized in this passage, and actually that's why Yeshua first sent out 12 disciples, followed by 70 disciples. This is the pattern of redemption and restoration, and everything that Yeshua did was meant to reveal that through his renewed covenant, he was going to restore Yisrael and the nations. Israel was not meant to be some exclusive or privileged ethnic group. And sometimes people get into this when I've seen it in Messianic Judaism when they say, oh, well, I can prove that I'm Jewish and, so I do these things, but if you're a Gentile, you do these things. And, we talked about some of this in some of the previous episodes. And again, that's some of the problems that we have when we confuse, the word Jew with Yisrael. Again, Jew is really focused at the tribe of Judah. That's where it derives from, that tribe name and that tribal territory and the actual kingdom, the house of Judah. But it doesn't encompass all of Yisrael. So, the Jews are not some exclusive group of people that, God loves them or, considers them special or, from everybody else. That's not the case at all. We need to consider Yisrael as the set-apart assembly of Elohim. And then Yisrael, of course, is a special people because they're in covenant with him. They have a special relationship with him. It's Yisrael, not the Jews. Israel was chosen to draw the nations back to Elohim into his family. And they were later enslaved in Egypt. But while in Egypt, Yisrael grew into a mighty people. Yisrael was delivered from Egypt along with a mixed multitude, and we read about that in Exodus 12:38. It says, a mixed multitude went up with them also, and flocks and herds, a great deal of livestock. And remember that during the famine in Joseph's time, the nations all came to Egypt for survival. They came for food, and Egypt was probably filled with people from all over the world. When all these people in Egypt experienced the wrath of Elohim, the Elohim of the Hebrews, they decided that they wanted to follow him. And in fact, the book of Exodus is called Shemot in Hebrew, and it actually means names. And one of the focuses of that text is how Yahweh would reveal his name to Egypt, and by doing so, through to the whole world, not only the people that were in Egypt, but after he decimated Egypt, everybody would be asking, what happened to like the most powerful country in the world? And everybody would know that Yod-Heh-Vav-Heh, Yahweh, the Elohim of the Hebrews did this. And so all this that we read about in the Exodus process was about revealing his name. He wants his name to be known and exalted throughout the whole world. He could have just raptured Israel out of Egypt, and I'm not a proponent of the rapture theory, but if he wanted to, he could have just taken them all out. But if that was the point, just to remove them. But that wasn't the point. The point was that through his wrath and judgments upon Egypt and the gods of Egypt, he demonstrated his power, his might, and his name to the world. And this is something to remember when we consider the end of the age. Many people are expecting to be raptured. But that doesn't square with the way that Yahweh delivered Israel from Egypt. And that was all a pattern for something that will occur in the future, something that we read about in the book of Revelation. In the future, when he judges the entire planet, he's going to deliver his people and the nations who join with him. So Yah not only brought out the children of Israel, but he also brought out the foreigners, the Ger, and that's his plan for the future too. Of course, this was the pattern that he'd already demonstrated with Abram and Hagar. Hagar literally means Hagar, the stranger. So Abram bringing out the stranger with him was a pattern that would be repeated by Yisrael when they came out through the Exodus. Now, Yisrael was always about the nations. They were a kingdom of priests, and we read in Exodus 19:6, and you shall be to me a kingdom of priests and a holy nation. They were supposed to minister to Yah and teach the ways of Yah to the surrounding nations. And this would be accomplished, though, either through their obedience or disobedience. If they chose to obey, they would shine as a light to the surrounding nations. Or if they disobeyed, they would be an example to the nations that they were exiled into. In other words, through the blessings and the curses, they were going to testify to the name of Yahweh, one way or the other. And they were supposed to reveal the blessings of the covenant as they were planted in the covenant land. And they were supposed to bear fruit. In fact, Yisrael is often referred to as the planting of El. And we read about that in Isaiah 61:3. It says, that they may be called trees of righteousness, the planting of Yahweh, that he may be glorified. We read in Psalm 44, 1 through 2, we have heard with our ears, O Elohim, our fathers have told us, the deeds you did in their days, in days of old. You drove out the nations with your hand, but them you planted. In Jeremiah 2:21, we read, yet I had planted you a noble vine, a seed of highest quality. And we read in Jeremiah 12:2, you have planted them, yes, they have taken root. They grow, yes, they bear fruit. And in Jeremiah 11:17, we read, for Yahweh of hosts, who planted you. They are supposed to be planted in the covenant land. And this is the restoration of Adam and Hava back into the garden. Once in the land, the Torah is the rule of the land, and obedience is the condition to Israel living in the land. And it's one Torah for all. Again, whether you're from the 12 tribes, or you're from the strangers that join in, it's one set of instructions for anyone who wants to be in the covenant and who wants to live in the covenant land. There are no distinctions. And we read about that in Exodus 12:49. One Torah shall be for the native born and for the stranger who dwells among you. We read in Numbers 15:16. One Torah and one custom shall be for you and for the stranger who dwells with you. Numbers 15:29. You shall have one Torah for him who sins unintentionally, for him who is a native born among the children of Yisrael, and for the stranger who dwells among them. The stranger is the ger. And again, remember Hagar. The stranger meaning one not born directly into the covenant, but they were always welcome to join the covenant. One Torah, the same Torah for all. Today we see rabbinic Judaism trying to promote the idea of the 7 Noahide laws, and you're not going to find some special set of 7 Noahide laws. This is a complete rabbinic fabrication, but they've got people duped into the point that if you're not Jewish, then you don't follow the Torah, you follow these 7 Noahide laws. So they're actually directing people away from the Torah. And again, this all derives from this misconception of using the word Jew in replacement of Yisrael. And so now we've got the Pharisees, the rabbinic Jews, who are teaching Pharisaic traditions and trying to tell people, oh no, if you're not Jewish, you don't obey the Torah. In fact, you can't obey the Torah. It's not permissible. And this is an outright lie, and it's a deception. The scriptures clearly say that if you're in the covenant, you obey the Torah, whether you're a native born or not a native born. And again, the Jews are just one portion of the descendants of Yisrael. They do not represent all of Yisrael. And so you've got to be clear on that point. Many people that are leaving Babylon and leaving Babylonian-derived religions find themselves with this confrontation with the Jews and with the rabbis telling them you can't obey the Torah, and that's an outright lie, and you need to reject that. That's an absolute lie and a deception. And they're going to have to account for that someday when they've got people coming to them who want to obey the Torah, who want to join this covenant, and they're directing them away from the covenant. One important thing to remember is that when they refer to the Torah, they're not talking about just the 5 books of Moses. They're talking about the rabbinic Torah, the oral Torah that was created and developed by the rabbis and the Pharisees. And this is exactly what Yeshua was confronting back in his day. They were adding to and taking away from the Torah, and they were teaching their traditions as if they were the commandments of men. And they continue to do that to this day. So they've added to and they've taken away from the Torah through their traditions. You don't want to obey the oral Torah, but you want to obey the purity of the Torah taught by our rabbi, Yeshua HaMashiach, Yeshua the Messiah. Now the 7 Noahide laws is just one of these Pharisaic traditions that they're trying to teach. There's no such thing as 7 Noahide laws, and we're not supposed to become sons of Noah, Beni Noah, which again, they're trying to relegate Gentiles over and say, well, you can't become one of us, because we're in this exclusive group that's only there for Jews. You have to stay over there relegated as a son of Noah, Beni Noah, and just be a righteous Gentile, and don't try to obey the Torah. You obey just those 7 Noahide laws. So the rabbis create this separation between the covenant assembly and the nations, which was never supposed to exist. So they're desperately failing in the job of Yisrael and the job of being priests of Yahuwah. Now, this is exactly what the Pharisees did in Yeshua's day, and that's why when he was cleansing the temple, he quoted from Isaiah 56, 3 through 7. And that passage of Scripture says, "Do not let the son of the foreigner, who has joined himself with Yahuwah, speak, saying, Yahuwah has utterly separated me from his people. Nor let the eunuch say, Here I am a dry tree. For thus says Yahuwah to the eunuchs who keep my Sabbaths and choose what pleases me and hold fast to my covenant, even to them I will give in my house and within my walls a place and a name better than that of sons and daughters. I will give them an everlasting name that shall not be cut off. Also the sons of the foreigner who join themselves to Yahuwah to serve him and to love the name of Yahuwah, to be his servants, everyone who keeps from defiling the Sabbath and holds fast my covenant, even them I will bring to my holy mountain and make them joyful in my house of prayer. Their burnt offerings and sacrifices will be accepted on my altar, for my house shall be called a house of prayer for all nations." Now, this is exactly the opposite of what the rabbis are teaching people. They're saying, no, you are separated. No, you're cut off. No, you're different. And yet Isaiah prophesied clearly to this point. We all can come in and we can receive names better than sons and daughters. And so don't believe that lie. You don't have to join the religion of rabbinic Judaism. This is talking about clinging to the covenant of Yahuwah. And when it says cling to it, it means hold on. Because there will be people that will try to convince you that you don't belong, that you can't follow the Torah, that you can't obey the Torah, and all that. And you've got to cling to that covenant, cling to Yahuwah. And the point of the passage is that anybody can join the covenant, again, but you've got to cling to it. Not let anybody tell you that you don't belong. Now after Yisrael entered the land, we know that they were divided into the 12 tribes amongst their allotted territories, and they eventually consolidated into 2 kingdoms, the northern tribes and the southern tribes. Ephraim became the dominant tribe of the northern tribes, called the house of Yisrael, and Judah became the dominant tribe of the southern tribes, known as the house of Yehudah. When David became king, he first ruled over the house of Yehudah for 7 years. He then became king of the house of Yisrael, thus uniting both houses under one king into one kingdom. Sadly, that union did not last very long. After the death of David's son Shlomo, the kingdom was divided in 2. This was because of the horrendous sins that Shlomo was involved in towards the end of his life. Now, Shlomo's son Rehoboam ruled over the southern tribes, and Jeroboam ruled over the northern tribes. Both tribes, both houses, both kingdoms eventually sinned and were exiled. First, we see the house of Israel was exiled by the Assyrians, and later the house of Judah was exiled by the Babylonians. Now, Jeremiah indicated that the house of Judah would be exiled for 70 years, a year for every year they did not keep the Shemitah year, when the land was supposed to rest. The land was supposed to get a Sabbath rest every 7 years. Their return was conditioned upon their obedience. In Jeremiah 12, 10 through 17, we read, "Many rulers have destroyed my vineyard. They have trodden my portion underfoot. They have made my pleasant portion a desolate wilderness. They have made it desolate. Desolate it mourns to me. The whole land is made desolate because no one takes it to heart. The plunderers have come on all the desolate heights in the wilderness, for the sword of Yahuwah shall devour. From one end of the land to the other end of the land, no flesh shall have peace. They have sown wheat, but reaped thorns. They have put themselves to pain, but do not profit, but be ashamed of your harvest because of the fierce anger of Yahweh. Thus says Yahweh against all my evil neighbors who touch the inheritance which I have caused my people Yisrael to inherit. Behold, I will pluck them out of their land and pluck out the house of Yehudah from among them. Then it shall be, after I have plucked them out, that I will return and have compassion on them and bring them back, everyone to his heritage and everyone to his land. This is Jubilee language, by the way. And continuing in verse 16, and it shall be, if they will learn carefully the ways of my people to swear by my name, as Yahweh lives, as they taught my people to swear by Baal, then they shall be established in the midst of my people. But if they do not obey, I will utterly pluck up and destroy that nation, says Yahweh. So both Judah and the surrounding nations who led Judah astray would be plucked out of the land. They'd be allowed to return, but they needed to swear by the name of Yahweh, not Baal. In other words, they needed to make Yahweh their master and follow his ways. Otherwise, they will be utterly plucked up and destroyed. And of course, that's what occurred in 70 CE. The house of Yehudah was allowed to return after the Babylonian exile, but they once again strayed away and they rejected the Messiah. And that's when the Romans actually plucked them up again, destroyed Jerusalem. The house of Yisrael took a different track altogether. Under Jeroboam, they constructed 2 golden calves and fell fast and hard. Their sin was so bad that Yahweh actually divorced them. And we read about that in Jeremiah 3:8. He says, Then I saw that for all the causes for which backsliding Israel had committed adultery, I had put her away and given her a certificate of divorce. Yet her treacherous sister Yehudah did not fear, but went and played the harlot also. Well, because of the sake of David, we have no indication that Yah divorced the house of Yehudah, even though she was also considered treacherous and played the harlot. The house of Israel was clearly given a certificate of divorce. Now, Ezekiel actually provided in very dramatic fashion a time limit for the exile of both houses, and we read about that in Exodus 4:4-6. It says, Lie also on your left side and lay the iniquity of the house of Israel upon it. According to the number of the days that you lie on it, you shall bear their iniquity. For I have laid on you the years of their iniquity according to the number of the days, 390 days. So you shall bear the iniquity of the house of Israel. And when you have completed them, lie again on your right side, then you shall bear the iniquity of the house of Yehudah 40 days. I have laid on you a day for each year. Now in Leviticus 26, Moses warned that if Israel failed to repent, that their punishment would be multiplied 7 times. And that's exactly what happened. Both houses were punished and exiled, while the house of Yehudah returned to the land within 70 years and retained their identity. The house of Yisrael completely lost their identity due to the divorce described in Hosea 1. But there was also a promise that they would be restored and reunited. Yahweh promised that he would reunite them under one head. And Ezekiel provided a powerful picture of that reunion in the prophecy of the 2 sticks. And we read about that in Ezekiel 37, beginning at 15. It says, Again, the word of Yahweh came to me, saying, As for you, son of man, take a stick for yourself and write on it, for Yehudah and for the children of Yisrael, his companions. Then take another stick and write on it, for Joseph, the stick of Ephraim, and for all the house of Yisrael, his companions. Then join them one to another for yourself into one stick, and they will become one in my hand. And when the children of your people speak to you, saying, Will you not show us what you mean by these? Say to them, Thus says Yahuwah Elohim, Surely I will take the stick of Joseph, which is in the hand of Ephraim, and the tribes of Yisrael, his companions, and I will join them with it with the stick of Yehudah, and make them one stick, and they will be one in my hand. And the sticks on which you write will be in your hand before their eyes. Then say to them, Thus says Yahuwah Elohim, Surely I will take the children of Israel from among the nations, wherever they have gone, and will gather them from every side and bring them into their own land. And I will make them one nation in the land, on the mountains of Israel, and one king shall be king over them all. They shall no longer be two nations, nor shall they ever be divided into two nations again. They shall not defile themselves any more with idols, nor with their detestable things, nor with any of their transgressions, but I will deliver them from all their dwelling places in which they have sinned, and will cleanse them. Then they shall be my people, and I will be their Elohim. And that's covenant language right there. Continuing in 24, David, my servant, shall be king over them, and they shall all have one shepherd. They shall also walk in my judgments and observe my statutes and do them. Then they shall dwell in the land that I have given to Yaakov my servant, where their fathers dwelt, and they shall dwell there, they, their children, and their children's children forever, and my servant David shall be their prince forever. Moreover, I will make a covenant of peace with them, and it shall be an everlasting covenant with them. I will establish them and multiply them, and I will set my sanctuary in their midst forever. My tabernacle also shall be with them. Indeed, I will be their Elohim, and they shall be my people. The nations also will know that I, Yahuwah, sanctify Yisrael, when my sanctuary is in their midst forevermore. Now the restoration of the house of Yehudah after the 70-year Babylonian exile was detailed through the texts of Nehemiah and Ezra. Now it wasn't a complete restoration, although they did place the emphasis on the Torah, and it was an integral part of their returning, restoring, and rebuilding. They eventually fell away. When they returned, they knew they had to obey the Torah because the disobedience to the Torah was why they were exiled in the first place. So they came back, they put an emphasis on the Torah while they were rebuilding, but again, they fell away as time went on. So that provides an important principle that in order to remain in the covenant land, you need to remain obedient to the instructions, the commandments of Elohim. And that's something completely lost in the Christian understanding of a covenant. Well, Yehudah was still in the land. The Messiah came to the house of Yehudah. He renewed the covenant as prophesied by Jeremiah, and we spoke of that renewal at length in the last episode. It's very important to understand the fact that we must be involved in this renewed covenant if we want to be operating in the kingdom. When Israel was in Egypt, the people needed to listen to Moses and his instructions in order to participate in the redemption and deliverance from Egypt. They couldn't go backwards in the covenant and just say that they're going to follow Noah or Abraham. No, they had to listen to Moses. They had to follow his instructions in order to move to the next progression, the next level of this covenant fulfillment. Moses came in Egypt. He was there to tell them the plan of Elohim. This is what he's got planned next for us. And so they needed to walk in that. And Yahweh sent one like Moses. He sent his son. And we need to listen to him in order to progress in this covenant. You can't stay back and not listen to Messiah. Just like Israel, they would have stayed in Egypt and they would have been destroyed with the rest of Egypt if they did not follow the instructions of Moses. If you didn't listen to Moses, you weren't going to be delivered. You were not going to make it to the promised land. And that's something we have to understand with Messiah and the renewed covenant. In order to stay in the covenant, you need to listen to the Messiah and you have to do what he tells you to do. Doesn't matter if your mother was Jewish or if you were born in Jerusalem. And of course, that leads us to another issue. For some reason, people think that if they could prove that their Jewish identity, that, they're okay. But that there's no difference. I mean, just because you might have a birth certificate or a piece of paper that shows you have this heritage, this documented heritage, saying that you're Jewish, doesn't mean you're exempt from this renewed covenant. If you're a Christian, or if you're a Jew, or if you're Catholic, or if you're Muslim or Hindu, you have to leave that religion that does not teach and promote the renewed covenant that was presented by Messiah. Again, just as Israel listened to Moses in the past, we need to listen to the Son of Elohim in order to continue in this covenant walk. But again, we have this distinction between Yisrael and Jews, and now we have the modern state of Israel. And so what do we make of that? And just how does that fit in to the plan of Elohim? Is this a fulfillment of prophecy, or is it something else? Is it a distraction? And when considering the modern state of Israel, many Christians will cite Isaiah 66:8. Who has heard such a thing? Who has seen such things? Shall the earth be made to give birth in one day, or shall a nation be born at once? For as soon as Zion was in labor, she gave birth to her children. Now, since the modern state of Israel was authorized by a vote of the United Nations, some attribute the partition plan vote in 1947 to this prophecy. Others look to the declaration made on May 14th, 1948, when David Ben-Gurion and the head of the Jewish Agency proclaimed the establishment of the State of Israel. Now, was this declaration of the Jewish state a fulfillment of Isaiah 66? Well, you need to read the entire passage to understand the context. Now, the verse about a nation being born at once is preceded by the following. It says, the sound of noise from the city, a voice from the temple, the voice of Yahweh, who fully repays his enemies. Before she was in labor, she gave birth. Before her pain came, she delivered a male child. So this is about wrath and judgment, not about the founding of the Jewish state. And this becomes clearer as we read on in this passage, beginning at 15. It says, for behold, Yahweh will come with fire and with his chariots like a whirlwind, to render his anger with fury and his rebuke with flames of fire. For by fire and by his sword Yahweh will judge all flesh, and the slain of Yahweh shall be many. Those who sanctify themselves and purify themselves go to the gardens after an idol in the midst, eating swine's flesh and the abomination, and the mouse shall be consumed together, says Yahweh. For I know their works and their thoughts. It shall be that I will gather all nations and tongues, and they shall come and see my glory. I will set a sign among them, and those among them who escape I will send to the nations, to Tarshish and Pul and Lud, who draw the bow, and Tubal and Javan, to the coastlands afar off, who have not heard my fame nor seen my glory, and they shall declare my glory among the nations. Then they shall bring all your brethren for an offering to Yahweh out of all the nations, on horses and in chariots and in litters, on mules, on camels, to my holy Mount Jerusalem, says Yahweh, as the children of Israel bring an offering in a clean vessel to the house of Yahuwah. And I will also take some of them for priests and Levites, says Yahweh. For as the new heavens and the new earth, which I will make, shall remain before me, says Yahweh, so shall your descendants and your name remain. And it shall come to pass that from one new moon to another, and from one Sabbath to another, all flesh shall come to worship me, says Yahuwah. And they shall go forth and look upon the corpses of men who have transgressed against me, for their worm does not die, and their fire is not quenched. They shall be an abhorrence to all flesh. So the formation of the modern state of Israel really doesn't fit within the context of this passage, unless the point is that it's all going to be judged and destroyed. And of course, it appears that judgment would be in order, since the modern state of Israel is not in covenant with Yahweh. They have not come with clean vessels, as this text describes. They haven't been acting as priests to Yahweh. And remember that the house of Judah was sent in exile for 70 years because they didn't keep the Sabbath year. Now, if the formation of the modern state of Israel was truly a restoration of under the covenant, then they would be accountable to the terms of the covenant, and they too would be accruing a punishment period, since they're not keeping the Shemitah year themselves. So that's, of course, unless Yah has somehow suspended the Torah for the modern state of Israel, which certainly wouldn't be the case. So what I see happening in the modern state of Israel doesn't really follow the pattern of a prophetic restoration that's supposed to occur through the Son of David. First of all, its founders were motivated by Zionism. They were secular. They were just looking for a land for ethnic Jews. They weren't looking to be restored to the covenant so that they could rebuild the house of Elohim and begin the temple service and serve Yah once again. Most of these people were socialists and communists, and they set up the kibbutzes, and which is nothing wrong with kibbutzes, but I was saying they were motivated by a certain political slant. And now we see that the modern state of Israel is actually a parliamentary democracy. It's not a theocracy or a monarchy that's ruled by the Cohens and the sons of David. You've got oligarchies there that are in the shadows, controlling certain things, and you've got all this underlying support from Illuminati forces, such as the Masons and the Rothschilds and the Rockefellers, just to name a few. And it's important to understand that Israel was founded to be a Jewish state. Okay, that's even though it's called Israel, it's just a Jewish state. They're only concerned with letting Jews become citizens. So if you can't prove that you're Jewish, whatever that means, again, that's a really arbitrary term, because does it mean you're a member of the religion of Judaism? Does it mean that you are an ethnic Jew? Again, they use the standard of, was your mother Jewish, which that's completely opposite of what the scriptures would look at. The scriptures will look at, who is your father? Was your father Jewish if you're Jewish? But they use whether you're a mother. So it doesn't really conform to the scriptures, and so there's a lot of different problems with the modern state of Israel actually being a fulfillment of prophecy. Now remember that a Jew can refer to as someone who's a member of the Jewish faith. They follow rabbinic Judaism. They could be somebody who could prove that they were from the tribe of Judah, or they could prove that they came actually from the kingdom of Judah, the southern kingdom. So it's not a specific term, and it does not equate with Yisrael. None of those definitions encompass all of Yisrael. Am Yisrael. So being in Yisrael is about being in a covenant relationship with Yahuwah, not as interpreted by the rabbis, but as interpreted by Yeshua. And since the covenant relationship was severed when each house was exiled, the only way to rejoin that covenant is through that renewal that was offered by Yeshua. So there's no indication that the modern state of Israel had any intention of entering into a renewed covenant with Yahweh when they went back into the land. So calling the Jewish state Yisrael is very misleading and confusing to many, because it's not accurate at all. It's essentially, they hijacked the name Yisrael and labeled the Jewish state with the term Yisrael, and it's very confusing to some people that don't understand the scriptural definitions of these terms. The modern state of Israel does not recognize the covenant renewed by Messiah. Instead, again, it's this ethnic Jewish identity that they're looking for. In fact, they don't even recognize that the house of Israel is entitled to come back into the land and is prophesied to come back into the land. They don't recognize that, and they're really not allowing that at this point. In fact, they've actually been actively excluding Joseph from coming back, because they've set up the standard that you've got to prove that you're from Judah. Well, if you're from the house of Israel, all the other tribes, you can't come in because you can't prove that you're Jewish. So this is very much like the sibling rivalry of the past, when the brothers of Joseph expelled him from the land and sold him into slavery. Later, Joseph was hidden from his brothers while they actually stood before him in Egypt, because he didn't look like a Hebrew anymore. He looked like an Egyptian. Once their eyes were opened and they recognized him, they repented and were restored to their brother, and Israel actually was reunited. And so the same holds true today. We see Judah not recognizing Joseph throughout the nations and not allowing Joseph to return. I go to Israel all the time, and I see Joseph coming in droves to the land. And yet Judah will not allow these people to come in and live in the land other than just being a tourist or getting a student visa or a work visa or something like that. They won't allow Joseph to come in and join and become a citizen of the modern state of Israel. So there needs to be recognition, repentance, and restoration, and that must come through the Messiah in order for the modern state of Israel to actually be restored to the covenant and to be restored to Elohim. As I said before, Yisrael was always inclusive of anyone, and the test was always the Torah. There was one Torah. And if you wanted to come, the nations were always welcome as long as they agreed to live according to the terms of the Torah. The Torah was the law of the land. Of course, that's not the case with the modern state of Israel. The enforced religion of the modern state of Israel is rabbinic Judaism, which derives from the Pharisees. And they imposed the oral Torah, their man-made rules, traditions, and regulations that Yeshua was absolutely opposed to. So the rabbis rule on religious matters in the modern state of Israel, or at least they try to rule all areas of people's religious life. Just like the Pharisees did, they really place a heavy yoke upon the people. It's funny, a recent issue in Israel involved the authority of the rabbinic leaders to provide kosher certificates to restaurants. And the chief rabbinite, he wants to wield the exclusive power to determine whether restaurants conform to the rules of kashrut. And of course, it's very onerous and it's a real money maker for them. And but it places a heavy burden on restaurants. They have to jump through all these hoops that the rabbis tell them to do. So they found other sources, other independent sources that would issue certificates to them. And the rabbinic, the chief rabbinite, did not like that, and there was actually a court case that authorized the restaurants to use other sources to prove that they were kosher. And yet the chief rabbinite started imposing fines on people, even though he didn't have the power anymore. He couldn't wield the power according to the Supreme Court. He still was fining people, trying to intimidate them. And so again, there's this oppression that the rabbinic Judaism places on the people, to the point where many people have just rejected rabbinic Judaism. So many of the Jews in the modern state of Israel are secular. They don't even consider themselves to be religious at all, and many are atheists. And of course, you don't just have Jews; you also have Arabs and Christians and Muslims. So the modern state of Israel is really it's a mixed nation, but none of them necessarily abide by the renewed covenant provided by Yeshua and the Torah as he taught. So there's real issues there, and we have to make sure we don't get confused with the modern state of Israel and Yisrael, the covenant assembly that's in the renewed covenant, the covenant renewed by Messiah. Interestingly, again, if you want to become a citizen of the modern state of Israel, but you can't prove that you're Jewish, and you don't have the paperwork to prove your Jewish identity, you can convert to the religion of Judaism, but you've got to deny Yeshua the Messiah. So that's a really incredible thing about the modern state of Israel. That's really anti-Messiah. It's really anti-Yeshua. In fact, many people that are in the country that claim to that live there and that claim to follow Yeshua get persecuted, and some people end up even getting kicked out. So it's like it's anti-Messiah, it's anti-Christ, because Yeshua didn't conform to their understanding of the Messiah, and they've rejected Messiah. So I have a hard time saying that the modern state of Israel is a fulfillment of any particular prophecy, and I see that it's really created a lot of confusion as people try to interpret the scriptures. In fact, all you do is go over to Israel and you observe some of the depravity that's going on. I mean, they actually have rave parties in the desert where youth are using drugs and drinking and dancing around golden calf. And in Tel Aviv, it's one of the most popular cities in the Middle East and Europe for gay pride parades and the transgender movement. So you've got all sorts of sins of the flesh occurring in Tel Aviv, and of course Jerusalem is full of all different religions and symbols, and it looks like a pagan city with all the domes and the minarets and and all the religious symbology, and it's literally spiritual Babylon. In fact, the book of Revelation refers to it as Sodom and Egypt in the end. It says in Revelation 11:8, and their dead bodies will lie in the street of the great city, which spiritually is called Sodom and Egypt, where also our Master was crucified. In fact, the modern state of Israel actually has adopted what they call the Star of David, but it really has nothing to do with David. It's the Star of Saturn, and it's really a satanic symbol. And we shouldn't have anything to do with that. You know, it's interesting, you call something, oh, the Star of David, the Shield of David, the Magen David, and all of a sudden, hey, you know, everybody wants to wear it and have jewelry and clothes and everything with the Star of David. And, you know, sadly, they're ignorantly putting on this, you know, satanic cultic symbol, which actually derives from the Seal of Solomon. And you get a pentagram on one side, a hexagram on the other, and he used it for, you know, divining demons and spirits and such. And so, and that's one of the reasons why the kingdom was divided in the first place, is because the sin of Solomon, and that Seal of Solomon was one of the horrible sins attributed to his conduct. So now we have the modern state of Israel actually adopting that seal, or part of that seal, which was used in so many of his sins. So, and again, you see the Supreme Court, it's in the shape of a pyramid, and archaeology is digging up in the land, and they're actually, you know, they're propping up sun pillars that are supposed to be knocked down according to the Torah, but archaeologists are putting them back up. So there are lots of problems with the modern state of Israel. Although it's still the covenant land, it's currently occupied by strangers who are not walking according to the covenant renewed by the Messiah, and they're not keeping the Torah as walked and taught by the Messiah. They're not true covenant keepers, and they're keeping actually true covenant keepers out of the land. In fact, they were the ones who were opposed to Yeshua in the past, and they continue to oppose him now. So what can we expect for a restoration, a true restoration? Is this part of the plan? Well, of course it's part of the plan. I mean, you know, Yah was not surprised by any of this. But is restoration going to be as we expect it to occur? Probably not. When Yeshua came the first time, most people didn't recognize him. Even though he was there walking and talking, he did not fit their expectations of what the Messiah would look like, how he would act, how he would talk, and what he would do. And so we have to expect the restoration in the end to be something possibly unexpected that we don't necessarily recognize. There's nothing in the scriptures that would ever lead us to believe that Israel was cast out of the land due to disobedience, but somehow they would be entitled to come back into the land and just have a free pass in the end. Sadly, I see many Christian leaders almost worshiping the modern state of Israel. And, you know, don't take my comments as anything, you know, anti-Semitic or anything of the sort. I mean, I have many friends in Israel. I love to go to Israel. I love the people of Israel. It just saddens me that they're not following the Torah. They're claiming to be Israel, but they're not acting like Israel. So that's the point of my comments here. I can see the issues, and we know the Messiah is the solution to that problem. So we pray that the Messiah will come and will restore even the people that are in the land now, so that they don't become subject to the judgment that he's promised to bring in the future. But, you know, we can't just condone it either. We have to recognize the reality of the situation. Sadly, I see many Christian leaders just promoting the modern state of Israel without ever telling them about Yeshua and advising them, hey, you know, there is a renewed covenant, and it would do us all well if you got involved in that renewed covenant. But that's because they failed to understand history and the promises. And again, remember Ezekiel, beginning at 37:24, it says, David, my servant, shall be king over them, and they shall all have one shepherd, and they shall all also walk in my judgments, and observe my statutes, and do them. Then they shall dwell in the land that I have given to Jacob, my servant, where their fathers dwelt, and they shall dwell there, they, their children, and their children's children forever, and my servant David shall be their prince forever. Moreover, I will make a covenant of peace with them, and it shall be an everlasting covenant with them. I will establish them and multiply them, and I will set my sanctuary in their midst forevermore. My tabernacle also shall be with them. Indeed, I will be their Elohim, and they will be my people. Again, covenant language. The nations also will know that I, who will sanctify Israel, when my sanctuary is in their midst forevermore. So this is the true description of a restoration of Yisrael. Now remember that the only way for Israel to be in covenant with Yah after the covenant was broken at Sinai was through the covenant renewed by Moses. Likewise, after the covenant was broken by both houses, it needs to be renewed as prophesied in Jeremiah 31. Yeshua, the servant David, came and renewed that covenant. Therefore, in order to be in Yisrael, we must be part of that renewed covenant, that covenant renewed by Yeshua. Nobody is exempt from this. And since the house of Israel was divorced, there needs to be another wedding. And this is why the first recorded miracle of Yeshua was at a wedding. And that's why Yeshua repeatedly provided parables about weddings. And with that understanding, we can now examine how the true covenant assembly of Israel will be regathered and restored according to the Scriptures. And that will be the subject of our next episode, the regathering of Yisrael. Until next time, my name is Todd Bennett. Shalom.